we've got a fast-growing middle class, but it's still a very large unemployed population within South Africa. A very exciting opportunity now where Africans are, emboldened and equipped to try and solve their own problems, and to go where the capital is. You don't want to be distracted in a cycle of perpetual fundraising when the real value is built when you put your head down and focus on what you need to do. Because we actually are fashioning ourselves to become the YC of Africa. That is an ambition that we have.
That's so good to hear.
Right?
Africa has been recognized as the next frontier for innovation and technology. Hosting the youngest population in the world, the continent is ripe for opportunities and ready for progress. The next guest has started something that is foundationally creating space and opportunity for young founders and entrepreneurs in the technology sector within South Africa. Darkies in Tech. Darkies in Tech is a registered non-profit organization and the largest vetted community for Black tech founders, investors, and ecosystem builders in South Africa. With a mission to drive inclusion and transformation within the predominantly white tech ecosystem. The community consists of hundreds of members across the country who share experience and commitment to bettering Africa through technology, hosting events, fireside chats, opportunity networking, mentorship, and skills building. Darkies in Tech is on a mission of its own. Joining us on the show today is the man behind the Darkies in Tech magic. He started his journey in entrepreneurship by solving the problems that he found around him using technology. Wanting to help others, he went ahead and founded Darkies in Tech, which is now on mission to help many more. Ladies and gents, I am honored, proud, and enthusiastic to have conversation with the one and only Ntsako Mgiba.
When you consider the South African tech ecosystem, the systemic exclusion is so stark that one might call it provocative. And when we thought about what should we call ourselves to actually arrest people's attention and to get a conversation going, we thought we needed a name that was equally provocative. And that's where the whole idea around calling it Darkies in Tech, because it's extremely clear exactly who we are and who we exist to serve. And, it always starts a conversation, whether we are at a local tech conference and we have a stall and people walk past and they see the name, you can always see that moment of processing and did I just read correctly? And they'll come by our stall and engage and find out who are these people and what are they about. And it gives us a really fantastic opportunity to really explain what it is that we're trying to do within the ecosystem. So from that perspective, it's really served its purpose. And it's also, of course, created fun moments and meetings, partnership meetings where, other people might wait for me to say the word first just to make sure that it really is our name.
Yeah. I can understand. I mean, even just, from the South African historical context, globally, everyone knows, what that looks like. But there are certain things that one could kind of see as preserved for a particular type of people. But I think what you guys have done is kind of change the stereotype of tech in general within the country. And I'm really interested to kind of finding the landscape in what that looks like right now and the impact that you guys have had in the system in general. But I'm also quite curious about yourself as well, because it's not everyone that can wake up and decide, you know what, I want to start an organization to kind of rebuild and restructure how we see technology in the African continent. Not everyone gets to wake up and do that. So there's probably something about you that kind of led you to that point. So I want to kind of take it back a little bit and understand a bit of your background. You shared that you had a startup yourself, so you are in tech. It's not just an idea. But Ntsako himself, who is the man behind all the magic?
Sure, that's a very good question. So I think let's throw it all the way back to my origin story, right? So I'm originally from the province of Mpumalanga, from a village called Tulamahashi, which is situated in Bushbuckridge. And I was born into a family where both my parents were employed at a time where not many people had both parents employed. So what that meant was that relative to our community, we had certain privileges ourselves, such as being one of the first in our community to have a TV, and one of the first as well to then have a telegame station, which at the time was just revolutionary technology. So from as far back as I can remember, I've always had the privilege of having access to technology and being around it. And I got to see at a very early time in my life the power that technology has to connect people. So ever since then, every moment, every year of my life, I'd always made it a goal to do something in technology. And it was somewhat of an obsession of mine. So, you know, eventually when I was 5, we moved out of Bushbuckridge and we moved to Johannesburg, and it was now in an environment where, I'm in kind of a formal schooling environment, and I get to have more access to, education, and this route of becoming a technologist becomes more and more viable. So ultimately, when I got the opportunity to decide what subjects do I want to do at school, I made sure I picked the technical subjects because I knew that I wanted to, be kind of the African version of Iron Man at the time. I guess that's Black Panther as we understand it today. But that was always the ambition. But, balancing this love for technology on one hand was this love for people, this deep love for people. And I guess I always wanted to do something where it would have an impact on people's lives and solve real problems. So when I got to UCT, which is where I went to do my undergraduate studies, I enrolled for an engineering degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're both alumni. I love it. Yeah. So I went to UCT and I enrolled for a mechatronics engineering degree. Once again, just staying true to that dream of being being the Black Iron Man of the continent. I eventually stumbled upon a university startup competition. It was a challenge to all of the entrants to reimagine Africa, and it was very broad, and you could make of that what you want. And I remember at the time working on another idea, which interestingly was also focusing on the township economy. And whilst kind of pursuing this, I went to visit my aunt who stays in one of the townships within the Mpumalanga province. And the first evening that I arrived there, we got robbed. And guys broke in, took essentially everything of value. My laptop, phone, all of her stuff was taken while we were asleep. And I woke up in the morning and I remember that feeling, that gut-wrenching feeling of, having been invaded. And of course, being so thankful that, none of our lives were harmed, but really frustrated and a bit confused around, like, why is it that, there was nothing we could do? Why is it that, our neighbors couldn't assist us? We tried to reach out to the police. They couldn't assist us either. And it really made me, concerned about the plight of people like my aunt who lived there by herself. Because in the height of the frustration of the situation, I could leave and go back to UCT and life kind of continues. But for, woman-headed households that don't necessarily have the means to afford your traditional alarm systems, your state-of-the-art ADT monitoring and response contracts, you are left to yourself. So this got me thinking, what can we do here? How can technology try and solve this problem? And of course, I'm studying engineering at the time. I've got this problem, and I thought, let's bring the two together. And we ended up building a security technology company that essentially connects homes and ultimately small businesses as well to their neighbors and the nearest police station in real time whenever they were experiencing a burglary or a break-in. And we were building this as naive students, right, who were studying towards our undergraduate degrees at the right, and so happened to be the right time in the ecosystem, because this was just at the early stages of the South African tech ecosystem where everything is about to take off. No one really knows what they're doing. So everyone is extremely accessible. No one is yet a big shot. So, you can pretty much call a meeting with anyone and they'll they'll respond to your emails because the investors are just as hungry for opportunities as the founders are for capital. And that's the time in which we were building this business. So because we, went on to win that competition and a whole bunch of other competitions, national and even continental competitions, we became these like pseudo celebrities on campus. And we were these guys who were, building tech companies, and, younger guys and girls who were building tech companies wanted to speak to us. And that influence kind of extended beyond UCT to the broader province. And as we continued to, scale and roll out and make partnerships with the likes of Coca-Cola, I guess our personal brands as entrepreneurs, credible entrepreneurs, started to also grow. And, it gave me the exposure to the ecosystem in all its glory, but also some of the systemic challenges. And that's ultimately what led to me deciding to start Darkies and Tech. And I think in part what gave me the permission or from the ecosystem to do this was because there was an understanding that I was a real builder, somebody who had actually done it before. I had experienced the ups and downs. I knew what it means to have investors and to let them down, and to, win and make, all these gains and so forth. And I think really what the ecosystem needed at the time was something from actual entrepreneurs, so that it feels authentic and it actually speaks to the true experience of building. Because a lot of the programs that were available at the time were being curated by corporates and companies where it's very far removed from the real builder's experience. So now, there was this organization that was for builders and from builders. And I think that really resonated. And because of that, and because of the credibility that I had in the ecosystem at the time, other founders were drawn to what we were doing and wanted to be a part of it. So to your point, it's not just anyone, I guess, who can do something like this, but it has to be someone who really has had that firsthand experience. And I'm very, thankful to have gotten that at such a young age. And I think the timing was everything really around kind of the beginnings of the ecosystem. So now when it comes to building the community, I have these relationships. So I can reach out to people. And now they're big shots now, but at the time we were all just trying to figure it out.
There's something about UCT, and I mean, this is not alumni bias speaking, but there's something about UCT that generally prepares you for the world, right? I remember the VC at the graduation, she literally stood there, she was like, you guys are the best in Africa, okay? So you're going to go into the world and let them see who you are. And everyone is like, okay, let's go. But there's something about that. But what I'm taking, from your story is that there's your environment is fundamentally important into shaping you into becoming what it is that you possibly can be in the future. And I'm really even curious now to understand the context and the framework of your family and the structure that you were able to have in that capacity. Because there are people who might have also had, families who were similar in structure as well, or had similar opportunities, but didn't maximize them in the way that you did. So what would you say about that environment really kind of, navigated you and pushed you into seeing tech in the way that you did? Or do you say that it's something innately in you that fell in love with tech, that made you want to kind of get into the space and fall in love with technology, etc.?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant point. Super excited to answer this actually. So interestingly, growing up, I used to love technology, so I always wanted the latest console, whether it be a PlayStation, Xbox, or whatever. I would always ask for it, right? And I was that child who would like prepare presentations to my parents and explain to them how having the latest Xbox would make me a better person in life, a better student, and all of these things, right? And exactly, pitching. Before I knew it was actually formally called pitching. And there's something that my dad did for me that I realized was actually such a gift now that I'm an adult. And what he would say to me is, yeah, fair and well, you want this, but you're going to have to work for it. So first of all, what you need to do is you need to maintain your grades. But two, I want you to go out there and actually raise half the price of this thing. So you can go out there and do what you must, start businesses. And if you can raise half of the capital to purchase it, then I'm going to, bring the rest. So you could imagine as a teenager, with such a challenge and a promise of, getting the latest console, you're going to do everything. And that's exactly what I did. So I tried it all, everything from car washes, painting, performing, musical performance to my neighbors who lived in our complex to just try and raise, half of the money to buy the latest piece of tech. And in hindsight, I realized that was actually like my entrepreneurial training, and that really just instilled this one work ethic, but also the appreciation and value for actually, building something of value and being rewarded for it. So when the time came now to ultimately do something and build this very complex technological system, I already had the confidence because I know that I've set my mind to doing something difficult in the past, and I was able to achieve it. And I think that really had it went a long way for me in terms of having the confidence. One of the things that, people that are closest to me say is often, why are you so confident? Why is it that like, you feel like you can actually do it? And you think about all the reasons why it would work before you think of all the reasons why it won't work. And actually, I sum it up to that and the influence that my dad had in terms of cultivating that entrepreneurial mindset. So I think that's really the secret sauce there. And the other part around kind of being intentional around developing technology to the end that it helps people. I think this really comes from my faith, first of all, and kind of family values around, ensuring that, the next person is okay. And I saw this once again displayed by my parents. Whenever there was a need in the family, we would always come around and they would be the ones organizing us, ensuring that we understood what was happening in the family, we empathize with it, and we can try and see how we can come together as a family. So I was very blessed in that way. And now, whenever I speak about, what can be done and what should be done and so forth, I always make a point of highlighting, but this is the environment that I come from. And I understand that not everyone comes from an environment that sets them up for success in this way. But we can be that generation that intentionally does that for our children. And that's always what I like to share with people. And yeah, that's pretty much kind of like, for me, what's been formative in helping me to think the way I do.
Yeah. And I always kind of I like getting context to the individual because it helps us
Yeah.
understand why you are the right person for the job, right? Because now we understand. Now we get the picture, we get you, we understand you. And in that sense, then we understand why this problem is very
Mhm.
essential to you and why you want to solve it. And whoever then is engaging with you in this capacity would also be able to understand fully that this is a person behind, or rather again, the man behind the magic.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so again, I'm just kind of like, intrigued by the startup that you had then gone on to build.
Yeah.
You mentioned a situation, a terrible situation that had occurred, but then something came out of that, something fruitful came out of that, which was, the solution that you had provided. Again, it's not everyone that kind of has a problem and thinks, let me go build a startup, let me go build technology around it. Why why was technology the solution for you for it? Why wasn't it let's start a neighborhood watch? Why wasn't it let's engage police to be a lot more effective? But why was
Mhm.
technology the solution that you felt like could change and help and provide a valuable solution in that sense?
Sure. So, I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've always been a techno optimist. So, I believe that fundamentally technology is neutral, and if the right people can harness it, then you can create a lot of
Mm.
good in the world. Of course, the reverse or the flip side is also true that if in the wrong hands, a lot of damage can be done. But I don't think that that should make us shy away from the opportunities that technology presents to solve complex problems. So naturally, whenever I encounter a problem, for me, the first question I ask myself is, could technology help solve this or address this in any way? And that's not because I undermine or neglect the human aspect of the problem. I actually care about that a lot, and I actually believe that more often than not has a bigger bearing on success. But I think because of my training, my passion for technology, my mindset around it and its capability, it's usually my point of departure is, have I seen anything that can solve this, or could it be built?
Yeah.
And then we start from there. So I think that's why even in that instance, I thought to myself, you know what? I might not be able to wake up in the night and scream and tell my neighbors that something is happening here. That probably would be the worst thing to do. But how could I communicate, wirelessly to people who care about me and have a vested interest in my safety, without having to do so and putting myself in harm's way? And I thought, you know what, this is the perfect job for technology. And I think once again, just another advantage that I had in that moment was that in the program that I was studying, one of my lecturers, my electronics lecturer, a brilliant mind by the name of Samuel Ginsberg, was working on a fire alarm system that kind of had the same behavioral aspects of notifying others, and it was built for shacks where fire quickly spread. So one alarm would trigger another alarm, and in so doing, it would actually notify the community very rapidly. So it was also piecing one and one together and saying, hold on, you can actually use the same idea of like this mesh network and, and collective action to solve the issue of crime. So that's something as well. I have to credit that solution, a very brilliant solution, in helping me to also think through how could we use technology to solve the issue of crime.
I think that is such I mean, the stories that you're sharing just are deeply personal and kind of heartwarming to me as well, because when I was a little bit younger, it was never technology, right? Because it was never in my
Mm-hmm.
environment. But stepping out of the country and stepping out of the environment, then, being in spaces like UCT, then opened up my mind in that sense. Then in
Yeah.
hindsight, thinking, oh my God, like that was the thing that my brain was kind of wondering, what if there was a solution for this? What if we could solve this? But at that time there was kind of no exposure to it in any sense, and that's why I love the organization that you have, because it provides that to those who might not necessarily have had
Yeah.
it in access, like many have. So there's something beautiful
Yeah.
about that. And
Yeah.
looking at technology in South Africa and in Africa, and I'm going to use Africa quite a lot in this conversation just to give broad
Yeah.
context to the continent in general. But technology in Africa, one could say that it hasn't necessarily even scratched the surface to its capacity and to its capabilities. Would you
Yeah.
then say that it's perhaps because it hasn't been built, that there hasn't been enough people to build the technology? Is there no infrastructure? Like, why is there so much demand, so much problems, so many issues that need technology to fix them, but there isn't enough technology to fix those things? Like, where's the missing middle, would you say?
Sure. Sure. It's a very good question. So I think historically, as Africans, we've been consumers of Western technologies.
Mm.
And I think largely even today, that's the case. In order for something to be trusted and adopted widely, it almost has to succeed within a Western context first, and then we will receive it and embrace it in the continent. Um, and I think for me, that's such a missed opportunity, because a lot of the solutions that come from the West, nothing wrong with them. A lot of them are very useful to us, such as WhatsApp and so forth. But more often than not, they're not built for the local context in mind, right? So to go back to the story of my previous venture, Jonga, we decided we had to actually build this alarm system ourselves. And the reason was because when we looked at what was available on the market, there was nothing that was built specifically for a township environment. All of the connected alarm systems that we saw were either Wi-Fi based, required a connection to the main power supply. And what we saw when we were in people's homes was that, one, they don't have Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was not yet pervasive. And, it wasn't always a given that they would have stable electricity. This is once again in the time where we had load shedding in South Africa. So there were these unique constraints to our local market, and the products that came from the West were divorced from those realities. So it made me realize that actually we need to solve our own problems. Why? Because we're the closest to them and we understand the nuances around the constraints. right, associated with these problems. And that's why we need to develop our own solutions. So I think up until recently, with AI democratizing the tools to actually come up with solutions for our own problems, we've had to rely on the West to build these things for us. And I think, the West will gladly do that for you. But now I think it's a new era for us, where, we now have the tools. AI has, democratized the ability to develop a product without having to invest millions of rand, which was previously the case. And now I think, well, besides actually the tools, also the education, right, around how do you actually build companies, and organizations like ours at Darkies and Tech are helping to bridge that gap, to equip people of color entrepreneurs with the right knowledge on how to actually build tech companies. So the convergence of all of these things, I think, is presenting a very exciting opportunity now where Africans are, emboldened and equipped to try and solve their own problems. Not to claim, being the catalyst in the early stages of, showcasing that Black people can do this, but in a very real way, I do think we are contributing to ensuring that, we're not left out of this opportunity. So already what we're seeing is that, Black tech entrepreneurs, if you look at it just statistically based on numbers, are more. There are more Black tech entrepreneurs in South Africa than our counterparts, right? So what we're going to see is more solutions to social problems, because inherently as a person of color, you experience social problems by virtue of where you come from and the spaces you regularly inhabit, which means when you build something, it's not going to just be, something that's just there for vibes, but it's actually going to be solving a critical issue, right? How do we get healthcare, high quality healthcare, down to rural communities? How do we ensure that educational resources are democratized and so forth? So I'm really excited about this next generation of African builders, because, now they have all of this, and they know the problem so intimately because it's our lives. So I really feel like it's Africa's time, and with such a young population, right? And we have the skills and we have the desire. So I'm really excited about what the next decade holds.
Yeah, and I think that there's such a beautiful thing about that. Even the rest of the world is acknowledging,
Yeah.
the youngness of the population.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you know this, but I had spent so much the last, say, 3-4 years abroad, and that kind of divorced me a little bit from on the ground, listening and hearing what really is happening
Mm.
from an ecosystem point of view. But if you were to kind of give a blanket approach into answering the question, which is around what does the entrepreneurial landscape, tech landscape, look like? Like, is there a lot more young people who are not only thinking about solutions but are going on the ground to create these solutions? What does that look like? If you kind of were to give us a picture of that. I've been curious. I've been like sitting in New York, and I'm like, I wonder
Sure.
if we are having these conversations, because you go anywhere in the subway, and everywhere you go, everyone is talking tech, tech, tech. And when I
Yes.
left South Africa, I hadn't had those conversations. I would say tech, and people would look away, and I'd
Sure.
be like, "Oh my god!" But I'm wondering now, if you were to share with us what that looks like.
Mm.
Is it optimistic, and where do you think we are going in the next, say, 5 years from
Mm.
now, in that regards?
Mm. Sure, sure, sure. So I think, for starters, a lot has probably changed from the last time that you were here. Now I think there's a general understanding that, technology is a powerful enabler, to, to scaling impact, to solving new problems, to building new business units. So everyone and anyone is curious about how do we actually incorporate technology into our companies. And that's right from corporate South Africa to small businesses. How do I use AI? How do I ensure that I can grow my business, that I can, access new value in the form of entertainment, if you're talking about consumers, the random consumers on the ground. So I think we're no longer as naive about technology. And I think to a lot of people, it's just about understanding the language of tech. And now I guess the verdict is out in terms of what will African tech look like. And I think this is some of the things that we're currently thinking about. So that's changed for starters, is that now there's a broad awareness of it and discussion around how we actually incorporate it. And I think here's where the biggest opportunity lies, because there's this new wave of African innovators, and they're coming from different spheres of society. One, it's from academia, right? People have realized that their research is actually, in some instances, they're sitting on really valuable IP. And whereas in the past, the mindset has been, I want to submit and I just want to go on with my life and get a job. Now people are a little bit more curious about, how do I actually commercialize this value that I've managed to create, or these insights that I've actually created? So that's bringing in a new wave of, entrepreneurs that have got this really strong IP and research backing the fundamental concept of what it is that they're trying to do. But then you also have, this persona that is currently within a corporate job and is feeling stuck because, they're a bit bored by the repetitiveness of kind of their day-to-day job. And they've got these side hustles, which have got potential, and they've been, working on them on the side. And now with AI, people are more emboldened to, consider the prospects of transitioning full-time into entrepreneurship and pursuing these things as going concerns. So that's the other group of people that we're now starting to see. And I think, between those two and people who, of course, like myself, almost first generation of the ecosystem, now doing more things, doing our second things and so forth, we're starting to have an ecosystem, right? I would imagine that it looks something similar to what like San Francisco and the Silicon Valley ecosystem looked like in the early days. So there are regular events happening, mainly in Cape Town, but we're starting to do the exact same thing in Johannesburg. And I think that's what we're passionate about at Darkies and Tech, is actually starting to catalyze the ecosystem through hosting events, so that as somebody who's interested in technology, you know that there's a space where you can go and there'll be an entrepreneur who's sharing their story. And I think also now there's been, an emergence of communities. So we are an example of this, but we're not the only one. There are other communities that have also started to sprout up. And I think that once again, this is building the ecosystem. Some of them are not necessarily focused on building companies, but they're more focused on building, products and developer communities and so forth. And these create really strong talent pipelines for communities like ours, where our entrepreneurs are looking for talent. So it really feels like, all of these different things are coming together. But now the flip side of the coin, of course, that's the optimistic story. The flip side is that there's this danger, this very real danger, that a lot of this interaction is still happening in spaces that are quite inaccessible for some, right? So for me, what I'm passionate is about thinking through, how do we ensure that we can include as many people as possible as we go on this journey, right? Yes, UCT is this incredible learning institution, and I do think in a very large way it gives people advantages, and I'm a beneficiary of that. But what does it look like to democratize some of this opportunity to other universities across the country, technicons and so forth, which are technical colleges for your global audience. So I think unless, there are people like myself thinking very intentionally around how do we start to move a bit of this magic away from the centers of Cape Town and Johannesburg to the other outlying provinces, then there's a very real possibility that it's going to continue to be exclusionary.
I mean, obviously, there's still a long way to go, right? We recognize that fully, but the optimistic side of it gives me a lot of hope that, there is definitely an ecosystem being built, because fundamentally, if there isn't an ecosystem, one cannot really thrive. There's limitations that come into play. But when there's people around and spaces around, even though I would kind of argue that there are still some players and stakeholders to fill that ecosystem and complete it, fully, whole-roundedly, that still need to come into the play, because it's still not, functionally enough. So I've always kind of come into it's only what you guys are doing is just the foundational work. but there's
Yeah.
still so many
Yeah.
sectors, private sector, public sector,
Yeah.
institutions, and that make up the holistic part of the continent, but are
Yeah.
not coming into play from a policy standpoint. From I could go on all day about what could be,
Yeah.
or what should be done. But I'm glad that you guys are on the ground, foundationally doing the work to ensure that we're starting the
Yeah.
conversation. Let's just have a conversation first, and then move
Yeah. Yeah.
forward
Yeah.
to that. And to your point about there being cities that are what Silicon Valley used to be, what New York City used to be, that Cape Town and Johannesburg. And right now, I was having a debate with people on Instagram about how South Africa and Nigeria are these like butting heads, and we're going to see in the next 5 years who's going to come on top as the next Silicon Valley in
Yeah.
Africa. I think it's South Africa, but the
Yeah.
Nigerians are like,
Me too. We're biased.
the Nigerians, like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, that one's Ntsako doing the work in Johannesburg. Y'all just wait and see, okay? So I'm happy to hear that there is definitely a ecosystem being built. But the other question that I have is around the consumers of then these products, right? The South African communities and the public,
Yeah.
who are meant to be on the receiving end of the products and the technology being built. What do they say? How do they feel? What are they?
Yeah.
How are they reacting to this, what you guys and what everyone in your community are building? How do you tell Andy, who's like, in the townships,
Yeah.
that there's this app, and how are you guys doing that?
Yeah, once again, a very good question. So I think
Yeah.
what we're seeing is that the businesses tend to be the early adopters of technology, and the consumer tends to lag a bit. And I think just maybe to give a bit of context around the South African consumer, we've got a fast-growing middle class, but it's still a very large unemployed population within South Africa. So because of that, it presents a considerable constraint for people who are building solutions that are specifically targeting consumers, because it means that you're limited to only a certain subsegment of the South African population who have
Yeah.
the discretionary income to invest in, services like Spotify and other tools that kind of bring them these conveniences. But to those who can afford these conveniences, I think they're very delighted by the fact that there are solutions that are now homegrown and, speak to their lived realities as South Africans. And, there are fantastic solutions like Pineapple Insurance, which is extremely innovative and, is bringing this archaic old industry of insurance and making it more convenient, so that just at a snap of a picture, you can identify an item and figure out how much, of a premium you need to pay in order to ensure its value. That's a huge inconvenience it's a huge convenience where in the past, you had to probably go into a branch, call someone on the phone. Now you can do this, by yourself. So as a sophisticated consumer, you've got this incredible gain in convenience, right? And then sometimes even cost as well. So it's generally well received by them. And I would say also the middle class as well is really enjoying this access, right? Because where previously these things were now out of reach, exclusionary, by virtue of where these activities were happening, where these opportunities were, tech in a way democratizes that and makes anyone with an internet connection and a smartphone able to participate. So once again, there's a gain in the middle class. I think really where the biggest gap still lies today is ensuring how do we use technology to solve the issue of unemployment, which is probably one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest, in South Africa, so that we can create more consumers who will then support more of the entrepreneurs. And it's kind of a virtuous cycle. So that's really the biggest problem that I think needs to be solved, is how do we actually create opportunities for employment. But yeah, I think generally there's a sense of optimism around technology in its ability to solve our problems and bridge the gap to opportunities. And I think there's just a few trends, external trends, that still need to shift positively for that adoption to grow. And what I'm referring to here specifically is South Africa's data costs, which ironically are some of the highest in the world. So while, there's now general wide access to smartphones, these affordable smartphones that are becoming increasingly powerful, and There is infrastructure rollouts within townships, wireless connectivity, and things like this. But we're still contesting with the fact that it's still so expensive to just surf the web. So these are some of the things that I think need to trend positively. And when they do, I think will further democratize, even reaching people in rurals and townships.
Yeah. Again, bringing the totality of the ecosystems with these other stakeholders that have to come to the play, because it's kind of then
Yeah,
difficult for the product to then reach its consumers, etc. But there's a third party that I would like to kind of get your understanding of, right? We've spoken about the
sure.
builders, the product makers, and the products themselves. We've spoken about the consumer, but then we need the resources and the funding to make that happen. So, what is the investor? What is the investor relationship looking like with both in the country and those outside the country? You are in a position to
Sure.
have that data and that understanding a little bit more, a little bit more in a bigger context. So, if you could just share that with us as well and give us
Sure.
paint that picture. Who's giving the money? Who's providing the money for this tech to happen?
It's a very important question.
Yeah.
And is actually one of the pain points of our ecosystem. And that is that they are, so South Africa is so ironic in the sense that our financial our financial institutions are some of the most sophisticated in the world. Our banking infrastructure is second to none. We've got all kinds of financial conglomerates that have done extremely well over the years. But somehow we still find ourselves as an ecosystem with a funding deficit, especially at the very earliest stages. So if you are an entrepreneur who's working on something that is extremely validated, has proven itself on the market, and you're what would they would be considered a later stage tech company or venture, then there's no shortage of institutions that are ready to give you access to capital to grow your business. But there's this really, really large unaddressed gap at the very earliest stages, which is actually so important to catalyzing the ecosystem, right? So no one is taking that early stage risk where there isn't yet revenue, and you have to go off more on belief and imagination and trust in the individual and in the market that they're building in. And I think this is kind of where we want to exist as well as Darkies in Tech, is assisting entrepreneurs who are stuck in this no man's land where they don't have the social capital to unlock the conversations with high net worth individuals who have the spare capital to play that game and to take those risks. So we are trying to ensure that our entrepreneurs understand that investors are increasingly moving to invest in later stage companies. So what that means is that you need to build your business in a manner that is beyond reproach. Everything that is within your sphere of influence, you want to tighten it up so that when you do get that moment to present to an investor, and we actively curate those platforms where that happens, that you are going to hit the bullseye. But there is a gap at the earliest stages. Thankfully, it's a conversation that is happening a lot more. And what we're seeing is a lot of corporates and sometimes government also coming to the party and making grants available, right? And those are typically available as an opportunity within a broader program that is designed to help equip these entrepreneurs. So this has become a bit of a hack in the early stage ecosystem where, as an entrepreneur, you know that if you can you can get admitted in, 2 or 3 programs, you can, in the process of it, raise the grant capital that you need to actually get your product to a certain point where you can take it to market. So that's one of the nuances of the South African ecosystem that I don't imagine is the same in more established markets like the United States. So there are these programs that are emerging, and they are now starting to come to resources from the likes of the development finance institutions, Africa Bank, and all of these different institutions, World Bank, are starting to capacitate these program providers to do this training, but also to make these grants available. So that's what the funding landscape looks like for an entrepreneur. You typically have to start off with these programs, get your first bit of capital. use that, get to a point where you can give something to the market or into the hands of real users, and off the back of the traction from there, generate revenue as quickly as possible, right? So here in South Africa, we don't have the same kind of luxuries of, off the back of a great idea, a great pitch deck, a polished pitch deck, and and a fantastic pitch, you can raise millions of dollars. No, here you have to actually prove that what you're working on actually has legs. And once you're able to cross that chasm of no man's land, then you'll be welcomed into the hands of those later stage investors. And I think this is where a lot of the systemic exclusion happens, the silent ones, right? Because if in the early stages you don't have the social capital as a founder, right, to reach out to friends and family, reach out to high net worth individuals because you don't know any, then you do fall into this no man's land, right? I think that because of that, you're seeing that very few privileged entrepreneurs are accessing this angel investment capital. But we're looking to ensure that that's democratized as well.
And what do you think needs to be done for, I mean, again, looking at like a comparison to like in Nigeria, for an example, where, those product builders and startups are extending and going abroad to go and get the funding and going across the sea to try and go and raise the funds. And because in that sense, right, it's a little bit more easier within those markets. What do you think, what does that look like here? Is that something that's kind of done here? What do you personally also have to say about that? Is that something that you advocate for? Or are you really challenging the South African investors to really go in and believe a lot more fully within the people and the builders here? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's both, and I'm advising entrepreneurs to be more bold and ambitious and to go where the capital is, because you need the capital so that you can get back to work. You don't want to be distracted in a cycle of perpetual fundraising when the real value is built when you put your head down and focus on what you need to do. So in the case where you're not able to access that capital locally, I advise them, if they have access to the resources or the opportunity to do it, right? So that's one component of it is, the world is becoming smaller and smaller. And, a lot of the times people can afford the plane ticket, but, maybe there's a little bit of nerves around kind of will I be accepted by the global community and so forth. But I really think that, because our entrepreneurs are thinking about building sustainable businesses from day one, right? They can fly over to ecosystems, more mature venture capital ecosystems, where lots of money is being invested at very early stages where there's nothing. So if you come with something that's got traction and it's got a bit, and it's more proven, and you're asking for less, right? Because of the fact that we know that the different markets are different, it will be discounted in a way. It presents a very attractive opportunity for United States investors. You get a better business and you pay less for it, in essence, if we're being frank. So I want people to be more aware of that and to go and take the capital where it's possible. But at the same time, I think it's also extremely important that the local ecosystem grows, right? And sees the value and the opportunity for an outsized return if you back the right tech entrepreneur in the early stages. It can really create the most fantastic outcome for everyone involved. So it's extremely important that this ecosystem grows, because in a way, it also provides the necessary stamp of approval for local entrepreneurs wanting to go abroad, right? And to illustrate this point, I always tell entrepreneurs, put yourself in the investor's shoes, right? You've caught a plane, you've traveled, 24 hours to get to where you are today. You're asking for money for me today, and I hardly understand the market that you come from. Why didn't your local investors give you capital, right? And it's a difficult question that founders then have to answer. And it's a very normal question. It's what anyone would probably ask this question to an entrepreneur who's pitching them. So can you see how this has to be done on both sides? The local investors have to play ball, but then also at the same time, we need to have the audacity to catch a plane, go into a more mature ecosystem with the traction that we have, and raise the capital that we need. And I think this is where the Kenyan and the Nigerian founders have us beat, because, they are not afraid to get on a plane and go wherever they have to go. I think South Africa is a bit too comfortable. It's a bit too beautiful, and in the country with the beaches and the bush, and entrepreneurs just want to stay.
Listen, and I keep telling people so many times that, like, being in these spaces abroad and seeing how much money there is, I'm like, guys, do you guys fully understand? Not necessarily even coming. You don't even have to come to the States to see all of that, but the access, the resources are there. We just need to be bolder, braver, and a lot more put ourselves out there in a sense where we can be able to attract this capital, because it's there. And I challenge all entrepreneurs to do that and to go and get the money, because we need the money to build the products. We need the products for the consumers. We need, like, right? And would you say that Darkies in Tech is a similar model, or looking to be a similar model, or do you know other models like a YC Combinator, for an example, that kind of aggregates entrepreneurs and funds the idea of providing the capital? Like, what would that look like in the utopia of Africa? A kind of like a YC model. And then following that up, if you could kind of share the average startup funding, kind of angel investing amount that you could say, someone's kind of listening and thinking, what would it be? I would have normal, regular people in the US ask me, like, Vuyo, how much do I need to, like, start, like, a property investment? Or, like, how much do I need to invest in Africa? But that figure is always kind of miscalculated for me. So if you were to also then follow up that question with that response of, like, if there was a figure that would help any entrepreneur in any sector doing any product, this would be able to help them get started, what would that be?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think to speak to the first point, I think there's a very real need for a Y Combinator like organization to exist, right? Because if you think about the Y Combinator model and what it does for the United States ecosystem, Y Combinator takes the very first risk on an entrepreneur. And in very simple terms, their thesis is, if you find the right entrepreneurs, right, who are hungry, driven, committed to what they do, and they're smart, if you give them more than they think they need, then chances are they will eventually iterate their way to the model and the product that ultimately succeeds in the market. That is vastly different from the mentality that we're seeing on the ground here. Here, locally, what happens is an entrepreneur will approach an investor and say, I need 3 million rand to develop my concept, take it to market, get a couple of engineers on my team, and so forth. And what they'll typically hear is, well, what can you do with half of that? Right? And the answer to that is, well, not much, because I'm telling you how much I think I need. And chances are they are wrong. They are going to need more than they think they need. So I think that mentality from YC, in the right people equipped with the right backing and the right capital, will figure it out. I think there's a need for an organization that does that. And once again, if you consider another aspect of the role that YC plays, is that they also regulate the venture capital firms, right? If you are a predatory firm that's offering tech companies in YC's portfolio crappy terms, then they just won't invite you to the next demo day. So they're also playing this very protective role of early stage entrepreneurs, where they are protecting them from predatory investors, right? And if you contrast that to a lot of what's happening on the continent, is that the power dynamic is shifted almost entirely in the investors' favor, right? The entrepreneurs are having to dance for their lunch, whereas, in the United States, they almost have to beg for participation in these companies that YC catalyzes and validates, right? So there's a need for an organization on the continent that is willing to take that early stage risk, but is also willing to hold the broader ecosystem accountable to meaningfully supporting these entrepreneurs, and also providing high quality education around building startups, right? YC videos are world famous, right? Even entrepreneurs within the Darkies in Tech community regularly watch this content. I watch this content all the time. But that like you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because it's not necessarily purpose built for the African context. But anyway, they've been very effective around creating high quality education and building startups. So this is actually what really excites me about what we're building at Darkies and Tech, because we actually are fashioning ourselves to become the YC of Africa. That is an ambition that we have.
That's so good to hear.
Right?
That's so good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. This is kind of the vision and the goal that gets me out of bed every morning, because we are now in this privileged position as an organization where we have the largest number of people of color, entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs in the country, right? So we have the entrepreneurs. We don't have pipeline issues. And because we are building with them, the community, as they build their companies, we understand their problems deeply. We know what they're working on. We know what they're striving to achieve. And we know the ones who are ready, the ones who the only thing they need is the right capital and the right guidance. And that's ultimately what we are building, is, the organization that can support people like that. And also on the other side, protect them from predators that really are there to try and, frustrate them or offer them false support. We want to protect them from those people. And we've already started to play that role in a way. And interestingly, we're very well known for the fact that we've got all these entrepreneurs. But what people don't also know is that we also have got relationships with VCs. So within our community, we've got about 30 plus VCs represented by people of color in our community, right? So we also then have access to essentially the next phase of funding for these entrepreneurs. So we believe if we can give them the right capital and the right support, leveraging our experience and our knowledge, having built successful and failed ventures, we can get them to the point where we can hand them over to the VCs who want them to look a particular way before they can fund them. So this is actually what we're on the trajectory to do.
Yeah. And again, the follow-up question to that then being, if you were to kind of give a blanketed amount or a blanketed figure to building, particularly in South Africa, right? What would that figure look like to someone who's listening and might, have interest in participating in this ecosystem here? What is an average amount for any sector now, that is, right? They could be building a product in any sector or for any problem. At least from an angel point of view, what would that look like?
Sure. So the typical angel check in South Africa will probably range, or the angel round will range from anything as low as 250,000 Rand all the way to, let's say, 2 million Rand, which is actually, if you convert it to the dollar.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about $100,000 on the high side.
Yeah.
So that's substantially lower barrier to entry than
like
maybe
$14,000
what is used to.
That's on the low end, like $14,000, just $14,000, just $14,000. And then on the high end, you said, what was that amount?
About 100,000.
About 100,000. Okay. 100,000 rand? No, 100,000 rands or 100,000 US dollars. Okay, because I was like,
that would be on the higher side.
Way. Okay,
that would be on the higher side.
Yeah, so that would be in rands about just under 2 million rands.
Yeah. So that would be that would be the pre-seed angel kind of level. Yeah.
Okay, so roughly around $14,000 to almost $100,000 is an average to get an African startup going, right? And I think this could be something that a lot of people could be able to participate in once they kind of know these figures, right? Once they know, okay, so this is what we're playing, this is the playing field, and this is how we can, get on the bandwagon. It can cost as low as a rounded amount of, say, $15,000, and that's something that I think a lot of people would want to participate in. Knowing that then from a risk reward point of view, the reward being as quite high with a little amount, as you said earlier on, it's less money, but building a better business, or building a business that could be with the market being so huge as well and being so untapped, because that's what I know and that's what I see. that it's such an untapped market that we have so much more to do. Now, another conversation that we are having consistently and I'm speaking from my point of view, in my context, by kind of keep referring to the US market, but I see us going there soon as well. So I'm kind of challenging us to see what the possibilities are there as well. But AI is in the zeitgeist. Like, if you don't say AI, no one's listening to you.
Yes.
What do you mean? You're not going to do AI, like you're not incorporating AI. What is the conversation here looking like in South Africa? Like, what are the builders saying about AI? Again, from those three buckets: the builders, the consumers, as well as those who are in the investor kind of bracket. What are they saying about AI? Is there excitement? Is there fear? Is there anticipation? And on your end as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we probably haven't said the word AI enough times on this podcast, so I'm glad that we're we're at this segment of the conversation. Um, yeah, so I think you can't go a full day or a half day without hearing about AI. So it's definitely the word on everyone's lips. Um, the builders tend to be ahead of the curve in terms of having an appreciation of what does it actually mean to make something AI enabled or to incorporate it into the product. They're typically the ones that are most excited about the technology because it enables them to do something better, quicker. It enables them to have a greater level of capability at a fraction of the cost. And then it gives them these superpowers to compete with the much larger incumbents. So from a builder community, it's just been absolutely embraced. And our entrepreneurs, I think, are like for like with the best of them out there in trying to incorporate it into their solutions. So that's that, right? We've got a lot of AI enthusiasts, even in our community. We've got a whole forum dedicated to the discussion of AI. We call it the AI Fanatics Forum. And that's where we speak about best practice, who's trying what. We're sharing the results of our experiments. And we're sharing, resources about the latest models and really geeking out about the potential that it has. And that's where we spend a lot of our time in that space. So you'd be forgiven for thinking that everyone in South Africa knows about AI. But when you leave the confines of our group and the bubble we've created for ourselves, and you engage with the average South African on the ground, you start to realize that this, although they have, an awareness of the term, there isn't really that deep appreciation for what AI is, right? It's more kind of framed as a potential threat to their livelihoods. So there are a lot of people who probably have very strong opinions about AI without really quite really understanding what it is and what it means for them. And I think that if you spoke to a random person, let's say three random people, two of the three might say, I hate AI and I'm completely terrified of it. And then you'd find the one person who's like, this is the best and, I can do all of these things. Chances are that's a small business. So I think it's still a mixed bag, and the corporates, the private sector, these big enterprises are also kind of frantically running around and thinking about what is our AI strategy? How do we incorporate AI? Do we build our own systems? We have all of this data, we're not leveraging it. Or do we hire a startup that's going to come in and help us? So these are some of the conversations that are being had. Do we partner for this? Do we buy it or do we build it ourselves? And I think what a common realization that these enterprises are coming to is that we don't really know what we're doing, nor are we geared to, we don't have the internal resourcing to build these solutions ourselves. So I think it's presenting a lot of opportunities for startups that are already building at the bleeding edge to partner with these corporates and helping them to deliver solutions in the market. And then public sector, of course, the the politicians talk the talk, they know the language, they're speaking about the importance of AI and how, as a nation we have to invest in skills development and so forth. But I think the verdict is still out in terms of, what are they truly doing, to ensure that these skills are created and that the opportunity for AI is realized. I think, yeah, that's probably a good summary of where each of the players in our ecosystem are with AI.
Yeah. Would you say that how long, how far away would you say that we'll be fully integrated? Would you say startups in and of themselves are going to kind of be fully immersed within AI? From your point of view, you kind of speaking from the community point of view and what you guys are building. But if you were to look at the overall entrepreneurial landscape in South Africa in general, how far away do you think that we will, catch up to the AI? And also, what from a regulatory standpoint, like if you listen again to the conversations with the Sam Altmans and all of these other AI companies, there's these regulatory concerns and these kind of human moralistic concerns. Is that conversation being had on the ground within the builders here? And I would assume it's a lot more human based. The AI here would a lot more be, with terms like Ubuntu and community and all of that. The AI would be a little bit more compassionate. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Yeah. I think, big themes like around the topic of AI within South Africa include one, data sovereignty, right? How do we ensure that the data that we are creating and is training in these models um, it's not necessarily an extractive relationship with AI. I think that's a big thing. How do we get more control and handles over our data and what it's currently being used for? And it's a very complex conversation to have because, of course, the largest producers and creators of AI exist outside of the continent, and those systems thrive and live and grow based off the data that we're feeding them. So this is a huge theme, right? Data security, data baseline data understanding, right? The value of data and what it can be used for. That's a really, really big topic of discussion that we're having here locally as it relates to AI. In terms of kind of how we're tracking against the rest of the world, it's a bit difficult to say. I do think we're not necessarily leaders, but I don't think we're very far behind, right? Because I think when I consider, or when I contemplate what is, who are the people who are currently early adopters of AI in more established markets in Western parts of the world, it's the builders. It hasn't yet really reached the true powers of it, hasn't yet really reached the average consumer. There's still the same questions being asked as the average consumer here. Likewise, our builders here are really grappling with this technology, right? And we even have members within Darkies and Tech who are trying to build this technology themselves. And I'm not talking about the applications that run on the infrastructure. They want to build the infrastructure themselves, right? So I definitely think that, we're on the right track. We're having the conversations. So we're not too far behind. And there's a real opportunity at this point for, language models, large language models that are trained using, indigenous knowledge systems and, African languages, right? The current solutions that are available in the market from the likes of your OpenAI, your Geminis, and so forth, still really battle in this area. So there is still an opportunity, if you ask me, at that layer, that large language model layer. And I'm really so proud of the people who are taking on that challenge because why not? Why can't you give that a go? So if I were to put a number on it, I would say maybe a year and a bit behind in terms of what still needs to be done. And I think over time we can potentially bridge that. And I'm confident that our bunch will probably figure it out. Oh, sure.
I mean, as I said earlier, we gotta beat Nigeria. We gotta beat the Nigerians and the Kenyans with this AI Africa. And I'm not even being biased. Like, I'm like, we keep having these debates, and I'm always like, generally the only South African in the room when I'm in New York. Always in the only South African in the room. So I always have to like speak up so bravely and be like, yes, South Africa. And it was like, but where's the South Africans here? It's only, it's, I'm always fighting this battle. But if you were to kind of look at where the industries that are really good for this market, for the South African ecosystem, for the South African market, what type of industries would you say are the best, or rather should be coming up a lot more? We had the finance tech bubble that kind of is established at around 2020, and there was a lot of investment poured into that sector, quite a lot, and we saw a lot of some of the startups kind of fail within the African kind of broader community in that time. I didn't hear any stories about the South African finance bro, so I was like, okay, good. It's not as but yeah, what industries would you say definitely are worth looking into here, right? Finance, you mentioned healthcare. Yeah, what else? And also from your community, what is kind of the percentage, from a percentage standpoint, that the entrepreneurs are looking like right now?
Mm, yeah. 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 That's a very good question. So I don't think the fintech Africa bubble has entirely burst, and there has not been an absolute evaporation of trust and optimism associated to it. People are still trying to enable payments, cross-border payments, enable small businesses to transact more easily with locals, um, and internationals as well who visit the country. So fintech, if you ask me, is still kind of the main anchor opportunity as it relates to the continent. And it's understandable because without the ability to accept payments, it's almost nothing else matters from a business standpoint if you can't get paid, right? And I think that's still a fundamental and foundational challenge to be solved in parts of the continent. But what we're seeing, and I'm glad that more industries are starting to get the same attention, right, is a lot more excitement around kind of green tech, right? Africa is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, whether it be sunlight, arable land, wind, all of the resources, all of the natural resources. Africa is uniquely gifted with this fantastic endowment. And it's really encouraging to see that a lot of the capital is going towards people who are solutioning in that space. Other big ones are agriculture. Of course, as a continent, agriculture is a really strong pillar of our economies. And a lot more attention is being paid to agriculture because of food security. We have to ensure that people can have healthy food to eat, right? That's a problem that's never going to go away. It's always going to be a constant need as humans. So the people who are solutioning to help subsistence farmers access formal markets to sell their produce and to get their produce listed on the shelves of major retailers. There's a lot of innovation happening there, helping farmers access inputs that can help them, grow their crops more healthily, more readily. These propositions are getting a lot of support, which is really great to see, because that speaks directly to something that, once again, we're uniquely endowed with as a continent. And then, of course, medicine as well. MedTech is another space that's getting a lot of attention, right? So South Africa is actually, once again, blessed in this area. A lot of the world's best doctors come to South Africa for training, right? For practical hands-on training, because, one, there's the need for it, but also there's a really high quality of medical practitioners that are here and that are educated and are able to help equip young doctors with these skills. So now it's a function of, how do we ensure that this medical healthcare or this healthcare that's available within regions that people have to usually travel long distances to access, how do we ensure that that's democratized? And those are some of the interesting propositions that are also starting to receive funding. And I think those are probably the main ones in earnest. But what we're seeing is actually, and this is what we see in our network, is we're seeing founders build across all verticals. We've got services technology, we've got HR technology, we've got people building mobility technology, so solutions to help people commute to work in a dignified manner, in a streamlined manner as well. And we're just seeing a whole range of solutions. All of them are included in some way or form in our community. And it's also good to see people building, solutions to these, because, one of the things we tell our entrepreneurs is, you don't build your company for investors. You build your company for your customers and to solve the problem for the people who need your services. And if you do a good job at that, the investors are going to come. So don't just necessarily follow, these bubble industries. Build real solutions that solve real problems, and the right capital will come.
Ntsako, I think the question that I have, we'll probably talk all day we'll probably be recording all day. So I'm not going to take a much more of your evening, but I think the question that I have, for the longest of time, right, when, spending time in South Africa, or growing up in South Africa, entrepreneurship almost seemed like this hobby. It almost seemed like, this side thing. It almost was something that families, communities kind of shun upon, that, it kind of brought a lot of shame. It brought a lot of, people were not comfortable and confident enough to say that they were entrepreneurs. And it kind of culturally was something that was like, oh, you have that little side project, it's just that. So from a cultural context, what do you think could be done to make entrepreneurship, business building cool, like where you are the odd one if you're not talking about, and like, what do you mean you're not thinking about business? Like, what could be done in that sense, particularly within young people, because that's the next generation. You mentioned 60% unemployment rate. The jobs need to be created somewhere. So there's businesses that need to be birthed and created. So what could we do to just bridge and create this love and desire and educate the community around making entrepreneurship tech cool?
Yeah. That's such a good question. I think the formal path of go to school, get good grades, get into a higher learning institution, a tertiary learning institution, and then getting a job is now being interrogated quite heavily, because there are a lot of people who've actually gone through their education all the way up to a bachelor's degree, only to still sit at home because there are not enough jobs that are being created within corporate South Africa and within government, right? The higher learning institutions are churning out this talent faster than these institutions can consume it, right? So people are starting to realize that it's not a guarantee that if you go the formal route, you will access opportunity. So that alone is starting to force people to consider entrepreneurship as an option, right? So just do nothing, and eventually people will already start to see that, okay, I have to consider more. But it's a very good question. How do we start to then make entrepreneurship sound more viable? And I think a huge component of this is showcasing more success stories, right? And this speaks to the internal facing component of our mission at Darkies in Tech, which is to raise the general tide, the level and the tide of the quality of Black entrepreneur, right? And the reason why that's important is because if we help produce better entrepreneurs, there will be more success stories. And the more success stories, the more case studies then that a young person who's looking to get into this can use and say to their parents, look, there are people who look like us who are finding success at this thing. And right now, the biggest challenge is that there are not enough success stories. So the more success stories we can have, then the better it will be. And I think there are already some organizations that have done a fantastic job at really highlighting the importance of small businesses and entrepreneurs in our local economy. And one of which that I would love to give a shout out to is Yoko, right? Which I'm very proud of, is actually co-founded by 2 Black tech entrepreneurs. And there's 2 other non-people of color in the founding team, but we're very proud of the fact that it's such a diverse founding team. And what they've done in their business is that they've shown that if you can equip small businesses with the right tools, they can thrive and really contribute significantly to our economy. So because of companies like Yoko dignifying small businesses now are part of, everyday business language. It's no longer just an aside when we're talking about small businesses. They're celebrated, they're championed, they're supported. So because they're now in everyday conversation and language, it's no longer as taboo to have a small business. So I think that there is motion and momentum in the right direction. But to come back to the previous point, we need more success stories.
And it's organizations like yours that are doing that and that are championing that. So it's such a beautiful thing to know that, we're not just sitting idly waiting for it to magically happen, but there needs to be the work that's being done to facilitate that, being the case. I remember when about a year ago, there was a counterpart of mine in the US who wanted to kind of invest a rough amount of roughly around $1 million rand. At the time, it was around $50,000. Wanted to invest, we were working on this project, and the idea was to find at least 5 or 6 female entrepreneurs and, film a competition that would be aired in the US as well. And that winner from that competition would fundamentally then, get the funding and the support and, be in billboards in Times Square and all these other things, and get, all of the things that come with being on a TV show. And it was so disappointing to see that there were not enough people that were interested in an opportunity like that. When she ended up eventually deciding it's not a market that's ready for something of this capacity, and we did a lot of efforts to try and get people to come on board and to enter and participate, but it was something that was taken back, and it got me thinking, like, oh my God, like, I'm one of the people who advocated for South Africa being the choice that's selected for this project. I was like, South Africa, you're going to get fantastic, entrepreneurs, but there wasn't that much interest. We did radio, we, put it on broadcast, the whole thing, but it didn't. And that really worried me. I was like, oh my God, like, firstly, I'm so embarrassed. I was like, but fundamentally that was taken aback. So how, again, preparing the community, but how do we prepare the people, the entrepreneurs? How do we prepare them to be opportunity, takers, and to go for opportunities, and to not be shy from accepting and seeing what things could be out there? And how do you continue to help your entrepreneurs? What words do you say to them to try and encourage them to seek out opportunities and to keep the momentum going?
Yeah, geez. Well, I mean, the first thought in my mind is, I wish you knew me a year ago, because I would have given you a list of at least 20, opportunity hungry, Yeah, geez, I would have given you a list of at least 20 opportunity ready and hungry female people of color entrepreneurs who, would do magic with funding like that. Um, but I guess it's in the past. I think, one of the things that I do to try and help cultivate the right mindset in our entrepreneurs, female and male, is I tell them about the benchmarks on the counterparts camp, right? And I have had this unique insight through various organizations I've had the privilege of being in before working on Darkies and Tech full time, where I got to see the mindset, the mentality, the audacity to apply for things that you don't yet qualify for. Um, and that mentality and how it serves them to access things, right? Because, right, let's face it, if you're looking for 6 entrepreneurs and 5 good ones apply, guess what? Even if you don't qualify and you're number 6, you're getting in, right? So I tend to share these case studies and these experiences that I've had with these engagements to try and embolden people to go for things, right? Um, if an opportunity has certain criteria, let's say it has 10 criteria, if you meet 8 of those, naturally as a person of color, female entrepreneur, right, you tell yourself, I don't meet all the requirements. But what you're not seeing is that, you meet the most requirements and there are people who meet only 6 or 5 of those who are applying. And because the ones who do meet more criteria don't apply, they get the opportunities. So what I say to people is shoot your shot, right? Shoot your shot. Go for it, and you never know what might come of that opportunity. And interestingly, those are the opportunities that tend to be the best, right? So I think, that's what we do. Not I think, that's what we do to try and support. And yeah, if you ever come across funding like that again, I hope you now know where to.
I am gonna call you. I'll be like, Ntsako, here's money. Let's go.